Hello everyone and welcome to today's video of Chess Down Under. Today we're taking a look at a really fascinating game that Veselin Topalov played back in 2012 in a simultaneous exhibition. His opponent was an Austrian player by the name of Menezes, and he's a very strong player for the context of a simultaneous exhibition. Menezes has gone on to become an international master, so very strong player. I really like unpacking games from simultaneous exhibitions as the attacks can be quite raw in these games. So let's unpack this game and see how it plays out. Topalov has the white pieces and he opens with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and g3. So Topalov is taking us into a Catalan opening. We have d5 and bishop to g2, just natural development so far. And black now throws in this check bishop to b4, and the purpose of this check is to discoordinate some of white's pieces. White intercepts the check with bishop to d2, and black retreats that bishop back to e7 now as it has completed its job of discoordinating white's pieces. White would have preferred to play his bishop onto the long diagonal here after playing b3. The purpose of that check was basically just to lure that bishop out onto an unfortunate square. Okay, so bishop e7, knight f3, castles, and white castles as well. We have c6, knight c3, and knight d7. So we have some very natural development from both sides here, placing their pieces on their most natural squares. And now in this particular position, white needs to think about, is he prepared to start gambiting some of these pawns here, c4 in particular? There are lines such as playing b3 or a4 to try to hang on to that pawn on c4, but in this particular game, Topalov decides that he is prepared to gambit the pawn and instead plays for an attack. So he plays bishop to f4, relocating his bishop onto a much more active diagonal, and that allows black to simply take on c4, which he does, and now Topalov plays e4, the most principled continuation, taking control of the center of the board. We can see these beautiful two pawns in the center here on d4 and e4, and he has all of his pieces on very active squares. As compensation, black has an extra pawn. Black simply plays b5, hanging onto his pawn, and white now really is not interested in regaining that pawn. He is all about the attack at the moment, and this is one of the reasons why the Catalan actually is quite a difficult opening to master, especially for club players, because in many different variations of the Catalan, white is happily sacrificing one or multiple pawns, and he needs to play energetically for the initiative. And a lot of the times it's quite difficult for club players to play with the level of accuracy that is needed to demonstrate the compensation for the sacrificed pawns. So let's see how Topalov handles this. So after b5, we have the immediate d5, just striking immediately in the center of the board. And we have now queen to b6 from black. He's looking to get developed as quickly as possible. White takes on c6, and now he is hitting the knight as well. Now, I know a lot of people here would be tempted to simply recollect that pawn with the queen, but that is very ill-advised. In the game, black played the correct move, knight to c5, leaving that pawn there for the time being. But let me just quickly show you what happens, how much trouble black gets into if he simply recollects that pawn with his queen. Let's say black plays queen takes c6. Have a look at what happens here. We play e5, and notice this dangerous Catalan bishop. Have a look at this. We are x-raying against the queen and the rook in the corner of the board. So we can see that this is going to get quite tactical. Black would have to try to block that diagonal for all his worth. But now the white pieces just start springing to life. We play knight d4, hitting the queen. The queen would need to relocate, and we take in the center of the board. Knight takes d5, e takes d, and bishop takes d5. And we can see that this is a very dominating position here. We are hitting the rook. Let's say, for example, black tries to move the rook. Well, sorry, you can't do that because we simply play knight to c6. We are hitting the rook. We're hitting the undefended bishop. This is a completely lost position for black. Let's say, for example, instead of moving the rook, he tries to intercept the bishop by playing bishop to b7. Well, now we're jumping into f5. Once again, hitting that loose bishop on e7. Let's say the bishop relocates. Now we take on b7. The queen retakes, and have a look at this. Danger, danger. Black is in serious trouble here. So we can quickly see back in this position here that recollecting that pawn on c6 with the queen is extremely dangerous, because after e5, that Catalan bishop on g2 just basically wins the game for white. So in the game, black knew what he was doing. He knows how to handle some of the venom in the Catalan here. He plays knight to c5, and now we have e5 anyway from Topalov. He's hitting the knight and opening up that powerful Catalan bishop. Now, instead of immediately moving that attacked knight, black throws in this intermediate developing move, rook to d8, hitting the white queen, and Topalov moves his queen to e2, simply getting the queen out of harm's way. But I wanted to show you that actually in this position here, the computer just wanted to actually sacrifice the queen. Let's have a look at this line. Instead of moving the queen, the computer simply wanted to take the knight, pawn takes f6, and after black takes the queen, we collect the bishop as well. Black takes the rook with check, white retakes with his rook, rook takes f1, and in this particular position, actually, from a material perspective, black is doing fantastic. Black has taken white's queen, and in exchange, white only got back 2 pieces. He got the knight on f6 and the bishop on e7, so surely that's not enough material for a queen. But the computer thinks that white is in the driver's seat in this position. After a move like bishop to a6 to get the rook into the game, we have knight to e5, and these pawns actually just prove to be incredibly powerful. Let's say black tries to scoop up this pawn here. We come in to d7, we're hitting the queen, black exchanges the knight, white recaptures, c takes d7, black is forced to take this pawn on e7, and have a look at this. Rook to d1, the queen is forced back to d8, we come in to c6 here, and black in this position here is in a bind, basically. Yes, he's up material. We can see in the top left corner the material count. Black is quite ahead actually in material, but all of his pieces are completely tied up. The queen can't move, otherwise we're queening. That rook has literally no squares to go. What is this bishop going to do? It can't go back to b7, that's covered. It can't go back to c8 because we just take it. Literally all of black's pieces are basically stuck here. So an absolutely incredible sequence that the computer wanted to play, but that's not what we got in the game, but it's okay because what happened in the game was even crazier. Would you believe that? So let's go back. After black played this developing move, rook to d8, hitting the queen, Topalov moved his queen, queen to e2, and now black needs to do something about this knight that's under attack. He centralizes it, knight to d5, we have an exchange, and black retakes with the rook. Now in this position here, Topalov plays bishop to g5. He'd really like to exchange these dark squared bishops. We can see that this pawn here on e5 is kind of limiting the ability of white's bishop to be active in the game. So he would really like to exchange itself off for the black dark squared bishop counterpart. Black does not want any part of that. He drops his bishop back to f8. And now we have rook to d1, looking to get rid of this pesky rook that's clogging up the center of the board. Black exchanges, and Topalov retakes with his rook. Rook takes d1. And now in this position, black plays actually the move that is the strongest according to the engines. He plays bishop to a6, which frees up the back rank for the rook to get involved. But actually, as funny as this may sound, that number 1 engine move probably is going to be the downfall of black in this game. So I'm giving you a bit of a hint in terms of how this game will unfold, but let's just see, because Topalov demonstrates to us the strategic dangers of this move. He first plays bishop to e3, so now he is pinning the knight against the queen, so that knight can't move for the time being. But there's another hidden purpose for this move, bishop to e3. He's actually vacating the g5 square to be able to use that square with some of his other pieces. Okay, black plays rook to c8. He's looking to recollect that pawn with something other than his queen, as picking up that pawn with the queen opens himself up to a lot of tactical possibilities. So rook to c8. And now in this position, Topalov plays this incredibly powerful move that I know a lot of club players would be scratching their heads at looking at this move. He plays knight to g5, and black scratches his head as well. He plays h6. He's saying, well, why did you bring your knight out to g5 like that? Surely that white knight can't do any attacking by itself. It's by itself there. If we look at this quadrant of the board, white only has 1 piece there. So what is that knight doing there? It can't attack the black army by itself. Well, yes, it can. Topalov plays knight takes f7. I'm going to give this move a double exclamation mark. An incredible piece sacrifice here. Black is scratching his head here. He takes the knight. Surely with no other white pieces in the vicinity, how can this attack work? Well, Topalov shows us that yes, actually the attack is correct and it works. He plays queen to h5 check, forcing the king back to g8. And when I first played through this game, it was this move here that I didn't quite anticipate and appreciate the strength of. I know that for a lot of club players, when you sacrifice a piece, you want to see immediate return on your investment. You want to start following up with your sacrifice with aggressive moves. But it's this calm move that Topalov plays which shows his incredible depth and strength as a player. He plays queen to g6, which is an incredibly powerful and potent move to just sacrifice a knight on f7 like that, and then to follow up that sacrifice with this quiet looking queen move. But it's not actually so quiet. This move actually has a huge amount of venom. In the game, Black played rook to d8, but I just want to show you the real venom behind this move. So instead of rook d8, let's say that Black wastes some move with something like b4, looking to get some queenside counterplay going. Well, the issue is now we take this knight, which is playing a very important role defending the light squares. We play bishop takes c5, queen takes c5, and now there's a number of different winning sequences. But first of all, we take on e6 with check, force the king into the corner of the board. And now with the king in the corner of the board, we play bishop to e4. And now we can start to see the issues with Black's position. There is really no stopping the queen simply returning to g6 and looking to deliver checkmate here. And let's say, for example, Black tries to desperately get some counterplay going. Come back to g6, we're threatening checkmate. Black has no choice but to try to run away. We give the check on h7, the king is forced to f7, and now there's a number of different mating sequences, but the simplest one is simply e6 check. The king has to collect that pawn, and now we come back with our queen, queen to g6 check. And after the king steps forward to e5, we can see how this is going to end. Simply queen to f5 is checkmate. So we can see, just coming back to this position here, after queen g6, the real depth of this move actually is that White is looking to completely dominate on the light squares and infiltrate. And now we can start to see some of the challenges that Black has created for himself by moving his light squared bishop offside on the queen side, is that his light squares around his king are terminally weak. The only piece that Black has that's guarding any light squares at the moment is the knight on c5, but White is threatening to simply chop that knight off and completely dominate on the light squares. So this is an absolutely crushing position here. Let's see what Black does. He tries rook to d8 to try to challenge that open file. And now Topalov plays rook to d6, an absolutely incredible move here. We can see that the rook has stepped onto a square that is guarded by the bishop. What is the idea of this move? Why has Topalov brought his rook up onto d6? Well, when it comes to exchange sacrifices in chess, there's a number of different kind of common motifs that you'll see exchange sacrifices. You might see them to damage pawn structures, but one of the most common ones, and what we see here in the game, is actually using the rook for interference. Now, the rook here on d6 is interfering with the bishop's protection of the knight on c5, and we can now see that the queen is somewhat overloaded. Because the bishop is no longer helping guard c5, we can see that the queen is doing two duties. She's protecting the knight on c5 and she's guarding the rook on d8 as well. So if Black were to just waste a move here, let's say something like b4, the simple winning continuation is just we take the knight, then queen takes, and then we take the rook as well. So simply deflecting the queen away. So this move, rook to d6, that Topalov has played, is an interference move with an absolutely devastating threat now of taking that knight on c5. So Black has no choice. He takes the rook, bishop takes d6, Topalov retakes the piece, he takes d6, and now we have rook takes d6 as well. So it looks like Black is starting to stabilize things a bit. He's up a lot of material at the moment. He's up a piece and an exchange, and it looks like he might be able to recollect this pawn on c6 sometime. But Topalov shows us that it doesn't matter what the material advantage is if you're about to get checkmated. He plays bishop to e4. We are now threatening to come in with our queen here and start harassing that Black king, taking advantage of the fact that the knight on c5 is pinned and that e4 square is basically White's for the taking. And now in this position here, Black simply cracked under the pressure. He thought that let me get rid of this pawn on c6, I'll give back an exchange, and I'll use my material advantage to win the endgame. Well, he played rook to c6, but he completely overlooked that actually in this position here, Topalov delivers checkmate in 1. I'll give the viewers a moment to spot this checkmate in 1. And yes, I'm sure a lot of you have already seen it. It is simply queen to e8 with a back rank checkmate as h7 is guarded by the bishop. So what an absolutely incredible game that we have here from Topalov. Now don't go anywhere just yet, because I wanted to just quickly spend a moment to go back to this position here after the knight to f7 sacrifice and unpack it a little bit, because I think it has some interesting concepts for club players to understand. So what is it that made this sacrifice on f7 work? Usually one piece on its own can't sacrifice itself and create a devastating winning attack. You tend to need the support of multiple pieces and your whole army to be involved in an attack for it to succeed. So what is happening here? Well, there's a few things to unpack. First of all, if we look at the two halves of the board, right, if we slice up the board like this, we can see that the majority of black's pieces are actually on the queen side, right? If we look at this side of the board, nearly all of black's firepower is on the queen side. And at the moment, white doesn't have much firepower in the vicinity of the king, but we can see that actually there's easy access to that part of the board. We can see that the rook can come into d7, taking advantage of the knight being pinned. So we can see d7 is actually available for the rook. The queen has easy access to the light squares. And this bishop, the glorious Catalan bishop, is one of the most important parts of this sacrifice actually. And why is that? Because the black light squared bishop counterpart on a6 is completely out of the game. If we make this game revolve around the black king, this part of the board here, this bishop on a6 has no real practical way of getting back to be influential in that part of the board. There's simply no way. And even if it can find an avenue, it would be incredibly slow. So actually it's the unfortunate placement of this light squared bishop in combination with h6, which means that the light squares around the black king are now terminally weak. And what makes this tactic even more potent is the presence of these pawns here. The e5 pawn and the e6 pawn here are kind of acting as a bit of a wedge in the position, making it difficult for black to relocate his pieces quickly to the king side. Any effort for black to relocate his pieces and get across to defend the light squares is going to be incredibly slow, because they have to maneuver around these pawns, and that's going to be way too slow. And in that time, white would have completely crushed the black king. So a lot of really fascinating things to unpack here to understand why this particular sacrifice worked. And I think it's very instructional for club players. Okay, well, I hope everyone enjoyed that game. It was an absolutely fascinating attacking game from Veselin Topalov. And thank you for hanging around all the way to the end of the video.